How's it going, my friend? It's Danny here from foxohealth.com, and in this video I'm going to talk about how the sauna may be able to help us increase muscle mass. So let's jump in. So how does a sauna actually help us to build muscle? So when we get into the sauna, obviously our bodies get very, very hot, we start to sweat, and we undergo heat stress. And heat stress is actually a form of hormesis. So what is hormesis? So hormesis can be described as the body receiving a net benefit from a small dose of any agent or process that would normally actually be harmful, toxic, or even lethal if we had it in a much higher dose. So we're stressing the body in a small amount to get this net benefit. And the sauna is a great example of that, because if we went into the sauna for half an hour, that's all fine. But if we go in there all day, then no one's going to be able to withstand that. It would just kill us, okay? So that saying, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, is very applicable when it comes to hormesis. The idea is what actually happens when this is going on is when the body is undergoing stress, the body will actually try and counter this stress by activating beneficial pathways in the body, but it actually overcompensates and produces a little bit more than it needs to. So not only do we combat the stress, we're actually left with this net benefit as well. So the idea is by undergoing hormesis, we're actually getting healthier and healthier. So that's the whole idea of it. But heat stress can be described as a form of hormesis. Now, the two pathways that heat stress actually activates that are relevant to this video are: number one, the production of human growth hormone, and number two, the production of heat shock proteins. And both of those can actually help us to maintain and even build muscle mass. So how do those two pathways help us do that? So again, before I answer that, let me set some more context. I want to talk about how muscle is created in the body and what's happening when that actually happens. So when we go to the gym, we lift weights and we try and build muscle, there's two key processes that we need to be aware of in the context of this video. So number one is the protein synthesis, and that's the creation of the protein for the muscle. And number two is the breakdown of the protein. Now, proteins, in order for them to do their function properly, they have to maintain a certain 3D structure. And unfortunately, the stresses of everyday living will damage that 3D structure. So for example, oxidative stress will damage the 3D structure. And if the 3D structure is damaged, the protein can't do its function anymore, and it has to be cleared away. So that's the breaking down of the protein. And actually, exercise actually does cause oxidative stress. So on the one hand, when we exercise, we're actually creating this muscle through the protein synthesis. On the other hand, we're breaking it down because of this oxidative stress. So those are the kind of key pathways, and there's this kind of balance between them. Now, if we want to increase muscle size, obviously we want the balance to be tipped in favor of this protein synthesis. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Now, I mentioned that heat stress actually causes two pathways. So number one was the increased heat shock proteins, and number two was the increased human growth hormone. So let's talk about the heat shock proteins first of all. So heat shock proteins will actually help us tip the balance in favor of the protein synthesis by a couple of ways. So number one, heat shock proteins actually repair damaged proteins. So they go around the body and they repair these damaged proteins, and that means these proteins no longer have to be degraded and cleared away, okay? So that will tip the balance in favor of the protein synthesis. The other thing they do is they actually prevent the damage in the first place. So I mentioned some of this damage is caused by oxidative stress, and oxidative stress is caused by free radicals. So heat shock proteins will actually scavenge these free radicals. So these free radicals don't damage our proteins, and again, they don't have to be broken down, which will tip the balance in favor of the protein synthesis. So that's how the increased level of heat shock proteins will help us build muscle. So the second pathway that heat stress will activate is the growth hormone. So growth hormone is actually downstream from a key pathway called mTOR. And as you might expect, growth hormone helps with growth and cell reproduction, but what it doesn't do is actually increase directly the protein synthesis, which surprised me. Apparently what it does do is similar to the heat shock proteins. It adds this protective layer against oxidative damage. So our proteins are receiving less oxidative damage, which means less proteins are damaged, which means less proteins need to be cleared away, which again ultimately tips the balance in favor of the protein synthesis, which helps us to build the muscle. Okay, so that was the second pathway that heat stress activates. It's the growth hormone. So let's now talk about frequencies and durations, etc. So how long do we have to stay in the sauna to get these benefits, and how often? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, because number one, everyone's different, and number two, there's so much data out there, and number three, it seems to be dose dependent, so meaning that the more you stay in the sauna, the more benefits you'll get to a point. Obviously, we can't stay in the sauna too long. So to make this simple, let me just tell you what I believe is happening to me when I go into the sauna. So this is not medical advice in any form, okay? So I believe if I go into the sauna from between 25 and 35 minutes, I should definitely see some increase in heat shock proteins and some growth hormone factor as well. But that's just my personal belief. I could be completely wrong. So if you want to find out all the details, you're going to have to do your own research on that one, okay? So that's basically the video. So I'll just recap and then we'll wrap it all up. So how does the sauna help us to build muscle? So when we get into the sauna, we get very, very hot, we sweat, and we undergo heat stress. And heat stress is a form of hormesis. Now, heat stress will activate two key pathways which are beneficial when it comes to building muscle mass, and that's number one, increasing heat shock proteins, and number two, increasing growth hormone. Now, both of those pathways indirectly increase the protein synthesis. So let's talk about the heat shock proteins first of all. So heat shock proteins will do two things. Number one, they repair damaged proteins, meaning less of these proteins need to be cleared away. And number two, they actually prevent some of the oxidative damage by scavenging the free radicals that cause the damage in the first place. Again, meaning there's less damaged proteins, less need to be cleared away, and we tip the balance in favor of the protein synthesis. So that's the heat shock proteins. And then we have the growth hormone, which is very similar. It doesn't directly boost the production of proteins, but what it does do is offer that protective layer against the oxidative damage, which means there's less damaged proteins to be cleared away. And again, we tip the balance, and both of those will ultimately help us to build muscle mass. Okay, so that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up, helps me grow the channel. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button for more videos like this one. And until the next time, please take care.